We shall move to questions without notice, and I give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Does the Prime Minister still have confidence in the Minister for Immigration?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I do, Mr Speaker, because the government continues to refuse and cancel visas on character grounds. Section 501 has not changed.
Order.
And I'll make this point. Since coming to government, we have deported over 4,200 individuals from immigration detention. In our first year of government, the number of individuals we deported from immigration detention was almost double the number the previous government deported the year prior. The AAT makes decisions independently of government to overturn some visa cancellations. As the Minister has said, he'll be reviewing the recent AAT decisions, and where necessary and appropriate, he'll overrule them. The Parliament yesterday passed legislation abolishing the rorted AAT and replacing it with a new Administrative Review Tribunal. And the only effective way of ensuring that tribunal members are making better decisions is to issue a new revised direction, which the Minister will be doing. The new directive will ensure that the protection of the committee outweighs any other considerations.
On my left will cease interjecting.
Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite would have you believe—
Order. The Prime Minister will pause. Order. There is far too much noise. I can't hear a word that is being said. The Leader of the Opposition was heard in silence. It's the first question. I'm just going to dial it down. Prime Minister has the call.
Yes, Mr Speaker. I suspect the Leader of the Opposition knows what's coming. Because when this bloke was the Home Affairs Minister, for example, the tribunal decided that an Iranian heroin dealer and ice manufacturer known as YKZZ should be allowed to stay. The tribunal cited Direction 79 and the higher level of tolerance as an important reason. During the same period, the tribunal decided a Brazilian man found guilty of armed robbery and assault and the subject of an AVO sought by his girlfriend should have his visa restored. This decision in 2018 cited the higher level of tolerance in Direction 65 of this minister. In another ruling, the tribunal sided with the Nigerian heroin dealer known as HMDS.
The member for Holt. Order. If the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the member for Holt, will cease interjecting as well. She's sitting a long way from me, but I can hear her very loud and clear. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition, when we're bringing the House to order, is not the time to interject. Order. The Prime Minister has 34 seconds remaining. The Leader of the Opposition, I need to hear the Prime Minister's answer.
The tribunal also cited Direction 79 over the Nigerian heroin dealer, HMDS, and said he should be granted a visa despite the government's refusal to do so. All under this minister. There's hundreds of them. Hundreds of them. He knows about it. He sat there wallowing in his hypocrisy, Mr Speaker, wallowing in his hypocrisy, and yesterday was out there defending the Administrative Appeals Tribunal.
Prime Minister's time. Order. The clock's running. I assume people want to ask questions and hear the answers. When the House comes to order, Minister for Resources, when the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Solomon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Veterans Affairs. What has the Albanese Labor government done to help fix the veterans' crisis that it inherited?
Call to the Minister for Veterans Affairs and the Minister for Defence Personnel.
Thank you, Speaker. I thank the member for Sullivan for his very important question, for his service to our Australian Defence Force and his work supporting the 5,500 veterans in his community. When we came to government, DVA was under-resourced, it was underfunded, it was facing a crisis. There was a backlog of some 42,000 claims with the department that had not even been looked at. As the former government's Veteran Affairs Minister, the member for Calare, said on radio this morning, at this time the government was only prioritising funding that had a political advantage, and so because they didn't feel there was a political advantage in funding veterans' issues. This was such a dire situation, the previous minister threatened to resign over it. The vast majority of claims that are brought are under the MERCA. The first step is establishing initial liability. Back in 22-23, it took on average 332 days just to allocate a claim for someone to look at. It took a further average of 113 days for that claim to be determined, which meant in 22-23 the average time to process was 441 days. Addressing this crisis is why the government has made the investments that we have. DVA is now better funded than it's been in 3 decades. We funded 500 additional APS in the October 22 budget to get about clearing that backlog. We've added 141 staff of funding, permanent staff, in the budget this year. The use of labour hire to process claims has fallen from a third to just 10 people. As of right now, that same type of claim I mentioned takes 14 days, no more, for that claim to be looked at, and on average, since 1 December, 6 days. The average time taken to determine a claim since 1 December 2023 is now 44 days. That means that it is an average of 60 days now to process a MERCA initial liability claim. Of course, there are claims that are more complex, others that need further medical information that might be sought, and that does take some time for those claims. It's appreciated that due to the backlog we inherited, some people have been waiting still far too long, indeed years, for their claims to be processed, and that's why we've put in the work to get these claims processed as quickly as possible. It's the processing of this backlog of claims that we inherited that means we are spending an additional $6.5 billion over 5 years to give veterans the benefits that they deserve. It's why it's so concerning that some say that the government should be cutting back on the staff that it has, which would result in veterans getting less benefits. This is not about politics. It's about doing the right thing.
The member for Canning. I'd like to hear from the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Chinese national MJVS's visa was cancelled following a conviction for possessing images and videos police described as at the most extreme end of child abuse material, including material depicting newborn babies. The Albanese Labor government's watering down of the law has allowed this criminal to stay in Australia, making our country less safe. When will the Albanese Labor government apologise for this catastrophic mistake and reverse Direction 99?
Give the call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
Thanks, Speaker. Time after time we get questions from members opposite, but one question remains unanswered.
Order.
The Leader of the Opposition is still yet to tell us why he, not a court, not a tribunal, his delegate released a detainee from detention who went on to allegedly commit a violent crime. When's he going to answer that question, Speaker? Now, this government continues to refuse and cancel visas on character grounds. I continue to cancel AAT set-asides. Section 501 has not changed, Speaker. Now, the Albanese government has always said that visa decisions need to be guided by 2 clear principles. Firstly, the protection of the Australian community, and secondly, common sense.
Members on my left.
A number of recent AAT decisions have not shown common sense, Speaker. And yesterday, the Parliament passed legislation to abolish the AAT and to replace it with a new administrative review tribunal. The Albanese government is delivering an accessible, sustainable, trusted and truly independent, Speaker, truly independent federal administrative review system that will serve the best interests of the Australian people. Ahead of the new ART commencing, I will be updating Ministerial Direction 99, as the Prime Minister has just said.
Order.
The new direction will ensure that all members of the ART will adopt a common-sense approach to visa decisions, consistent with the intent of Ministerial Direction 99. First and foremost, this means ensuring that the protection of the community outweighs other considerations. This has always been the Albanese government's highest priority. Consistent with this, Speaker, and I hope members opposite would be interested in this, the revised direction will also strengthen the principles of community safety in the making of decisions, including the impact of decisions on the victim of crime and their family members, and also strengthen the family violence provisions to reflect the government's and Australians more broadly commitment to end violence against women and children.
The Minister will pause. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Mr Speaker, I move an extension of time to give the Minister time to apologise for the horrific abuses that have been described by the individual that he has led out on the streets.
Members on my right will cease interjecting while a member is taking a point of order. The member is entitled to take the point of order. The member is able to do that when the time is concluded, not during the time. So she's entitled to do that, but she'll just have to wait to the end of the answer. The Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Speaker. This is a change that will guide all decision-makers within the department, the AAT and the new ART to ensure that better decisions are made in line with the expectations of the government and the community.
I give the call to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How has the Albanese Labor government improved support for our veterans, and why is this support so necessary after years of neglect?
Give the call to the order. Members on my left, Member Fadden shouldn't be interjecting before I call. If this continues, people won't be warned. They'll just have to leave. It is a red line. No one is to interject before a minister, Prime Minister, is called. If they say something and you want to react, well, go for it. But until that happens, no one, including the member for Barker in particular, will not be interjecting. The Minister for Defence and the Deputy Prime Minister has the call.
Can I thank the member for her question and acknowledge her service? On the 9th of February in 2021, former Prime Minister Morrison attended RAF Base Williamtown for a defence announcement. Now, for those opposite, the substance of that announcement was less important than the theatre, because we had Top Gun music, we had pageantry, we had hoopla. A year earlier, on the 4th of January, at the height of the Black Summer bushfires, those opposite produced an ad featuring the Australian Defence Force to raise money for the Liberal Party. Now, these two incidents characterise the essence of the Liberals, because as they see it, defence is all about politics, defence is all about them.
Member for Moncrief.
But while all of this was happening, our veterans, the men and women who have worn our nation's uniform, were suffering. While the Liberals were using defence for a political
the Deputy
fundraiser.
Prime Minister will pause. No, before I deal with the member for Canning, I've got one issue to deal with, and then you'll get the call. The member for Deakin was on the warning on the first question. He's been continued to be interjecting through every answer. It's the same old story. He'll leave the chamber under 94A. Everyone gets a fair go, but if you get a warning, chances are, if you keep interjecting, you won't be staying. Now, the member for Canning. I'll deal with his point of order before we return to the question.
Thanks, Speaker. The question was about the government's support for veterans. There was no alternative approaches qualifier This is an easy chip shot onto the green, and
resume your seat.
clearly.
Yeah. Order. The member for Canning has raised his point of order. He's been heard in silence. I'll now hear from the Leader of the House on the point of order.
Mr Speaker, the question referred to years of neglect, and years of neglect is exactly what the Defence Minister is going through.
The Minister was asked about previous decisions, so I'm going to listen to his answer to make sure he's being relevant. He has the call.
While the Liberals were using defence as a political fundraiser, the backlog in veterans' claims, that is, claims which no one had even looked at, was about 20,000. A year later, as the Top Gun music was playing, that number had risen to more than 30,000, and by the time those opposite leave government, that number stood at more than 40,000. This has been described as a stain on the former government, but the last Defence Minister in that government was the Leader of the Opposition, and the Shadow Minister was a minister in the broader portfolio. It is a stain on them as well. Now, since coming to government, from our very first budget, we've increased the number of public servants in the Department of Veterans Affairs by 1,000, so they can deal with this backlog and get entitlements flowing to our veterans, to the men and women who have served our nation. And as of today, that backlog is entirely cleared. Now, lest there be any confusion that this is a story about history, let's be completely clear. This is a story about right now. Because 13 days ago, when the Leader of the Opposition delivered his budget reply, the closest he came to a policy announcement was a commitment to cut public servants, a commitment which was backed in by the Shadow Minister the very next day, the same public servants who are seeing entitlements flow to our veterans. For those opposite, nothing has changed. They just see defence as a political opportunity. This government understands that at the heart of defence are the men and women who have and continue to serve us all by wearing our nation's uniform to keep Australians safe.
Before I call the member for Kennedy, he will get the call. I'll just do some acknowledgements that are in the gallery. I'm pleased to inform the House that present in the gallery today is the Honourable Dan Cregan MP, Member for Cavill and a Minister in the South Australian Government, and also His Excellency Stavros Venizelos, the Ambassador of Greece to Australia, and also present in the gallery are participants in the South East Asia Future of Leadership program. A warm welcome to question time. Give the call to the Member for Kennedy.
Environment Minister. EVs are fuelled by solar panels from China, where production and smelting belch out vast clouds of CO2. Ethanol motor vehicles emit CO2, but the sugarcane crop absorbs back these emissions. Minister, wasn't Morris Iema right introducing ethanol, referring to petrol's carcinogens? I won't go another day with people's death on my conscience, people that didn't have to die. Brazil's petrol, 49% ethanol, sells for $1.10 a litre. Australia's petrol imports are $48 billion a year. Doesn't this magic wand a richer, cleaner, more affordable Australia?
Order. The member's walking stick or whatever is there shall, regardless of age, there's no props available for anyone, walking or not. Order. The Minister for the Environment and Water has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Kennedy for his question. I understand the member for Kennedy is asking about air quality and the better air quality we would get with reduced carbon-based fuels. And the first thing I'd say to him is, of course, that's exactly why we've introduced the vehicle emission standards on this side and why people should support them. Of course, it's about cheaper, more efficient fuel use in vehicles, but it's also about better air quality. The second thing I'd say to the member for Kennedy is I know that one of his particular interests is not just the use of sugarcane for bioethanol production, but also the use of prickly woody weeds like prickly acacia. And there's a lot of work going on around the world about using woody weeds. The member for Kennedy is quite right. Actually, millions of hectares of the Mitchell grass plains covered in prickly acacia, which of course competes with other types of native grasses and plants, but also reduces the habitat that our native animals have to make their homes. They can't get through the prickly acacia. So he's spoken to me before about the potential use of these woody weeds as a source of bioethanol, and of course that's something very worth exploring. And the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy are both very actively exploring opportunities for bioethanol and other biofuels. And indeed, the member for training is also supporting apprentices to upskill in the areas of biofuels, including ethanol. And so I'd say that our government is both working to reduce those woody weeds through my portfolio of the environment. We're spending millions of dollars dealing with problems like that prickly acacia, also like gamba grass. Gamba grass, huge problem right across the north of Australia. Again, competes with native species, reduces habitat for certain plants and animals, but also is a huge fire risk. We know that when gamba grass and other types of introduced grasses take off in places like Kakadu National Park, Litchfield National Park, they actually burn hotter than native vegetation. So the impact of fires is much worse when we've got those invasive species. So I certainly agree with the member for Kennedy that these are ideas worth exploring, and the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government, the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, I'm sure would be happy to talk with him. One other thing I wanted to tell him was the CSIRO has recently been looking at microalgae as a source of bioethanol, and I know he is very interested in Asparagopsis seaweed and its introduction into feedstock for cattle, the potential to reduce methane emissions. Here's microalgae for fuel.
Order. The Minister's time has concluded. Give a call to the member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. What was the state of veteran compensation claims when the Albanese Labor government took office? And what is the government doing to deliver on our nation's promise to veterans?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Blair for his question, and I know that the member for Blair is doing an extraordinary job, and I've attended, indeed, veterans events
Members on my left.
at Ipswich with the member for Blair in the past. Our government has invested record funding, so DVA is the best resource it's been in 3 decades. We started with 500 new frontline staff at the department in our very first budget.
The member for New England
and this month's budget
rejecting.
includes an additional $477 million for our veterans, including an additional more than 140 staff to process claims even faster. Now, thanks to our investments and the hard work of these staff, we're clearing the claims backlog. More claims being processed has a fiscal impact, and the impact of this is an extra $6.5 billion in payments for veterans over the next 5 years. That's a cost to government, but it's a cost in which we owe those veterans.
That's right.
They've earned it by wearing our uniform, by defending our nation and honouring us with their presence. Now, this is long overdue money, and if you don't have staff and you're not processing claims, then people aren't getting them. And that was what was going on under the former government. I'm asked about what we inherited. Well, the fact is that when we took office in May 2022, and when the minister undertook the role that he was appointed to, we inherited a backlog of 42,000 compensation claims. That's 42,000 veterans who had defended our nation who were waiting on claims. And tragically, of course, some of them never ever got to receive them. No wonder the former Minister for Veterans Affairs, the member for Calare, threatened to resign as the minister before that last budget in 2022. He said this was, to quote him, having an appalling effect on the physical and mental health of our veterans. He argued for funding in the former government, but he was told, to quote him, they didn't feel there was a political advantage in funding veterans' issues. So they did nothing. Now, we owe our veterans more than words and tributes. We owe them more than gratitude. We owe them what they have earned. And this government is delivering on Australia's promise to them.
Call to the Honourable the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. New Zealand citizen Troy Ollerman had his visa cancelled following convictions for serious assaults against women and children, including hitting a 3-year-old disabled toddler in the head. The Albanese Labor government's watering down of the law has allowed this criminal to stay in Australia, making our country less safe. When will the Albanese Labor government apologise for this catastrophic mistake and revoke Direction 99?
The call to the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs.
I thank you, Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Nationals for his question. Of course, all of us here are concerned for the victims in these circumstances, and that is why, as the Prime Minister has said, and I've just outlined at some length, that we are introducing a new revised ministerial direction to ensure that the clear principles that we've held to for some time, protection of the community and common sense, are part of visa decision-making consistently, in particular at the AAT, where we have not been seeing common sense. I do note, Speaker, yesterday that members opposite had a chance to have a say about that. They chose to vote to keep the AAT.
Order. The member for Herbert. Order. The Minister for Skills and Training will cease interjecting so I can hear from... Order. The member for Hume. The member for Hume. I'm trying to hear a question. And members on my right are provoking you, and I'll ensure that they don't do that as well. The member for Pearce has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Social Services. What support is the Albanese Labor government providing to veterans through the Social Security Safety Net? What approaches have been rejected? Thank you.
Give a call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Pearce for the question. Of course, the Albanese Labor government is committed to supporting former defence personnel, veterans and their families. Now, in my portfolio, we are delivering targeted cost of living relief, including to veterans. Now, today I introduced a bill that will deliver an increase to the maximum rates of rent assistance by a further 10%. Now, this is our second consecutive increase and means that on the September 20, the maximum rates of rent assistance will have increased by 40% since this government was elected. Now, this support, of course, helps close to 1 million households, including 13,000 veterans and dependents. Now, our government has also announced we will freeze Social Security deeming rates for a further 12 months, so that part pensioners, including 96,000 service pension and income support recipients, can keep more of their payment. And of course, in the budget we've also announced a freeze on the price of PBS medicines for concession card holders, so that they will pay a maximum of $7.70 per script for the next 5 years, which will benefit, might be of interest to those on the other side, 330,000 veterans and dependents. Now, last year's budget, our government made a record investment in Medicare. We tripled the Veterans Access payment for those on a white card or a gold card, helping 290,000 veterans get better access to a GP. So our government's approach has been supporting veterans as well as people right around the country. Of course, this stands in stark contrast to those opposite. Now, just a few weeks ago, we had the member for Hume who signalled if he was Treasurer, there would be a question around whether indexation would flow to pensioners and veterans, as he vowed to cut so-called unrestrained spending. Well, I've got news for the member for Hume. Indexation is a critical part of ensuring pensioners and veterans' payments keep up with the cost of living. And it is insulting. It is insulting. It is insulting that he thinks that this indexation is so-called discretionary spending. Now, we all know that the coalition has formed. They cut pensions and payments when this Leader of the Opposition was in the Cabinet, including veterans' payments. Those opposite have done it before, they'll do it again. It is our government that stands up on the side of veterans, ensuring they get the support they need when they need it.
Give the call to the honourable member for Wannon.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Iranian national YVBM's visa was cancelled following domestic violence convictions, including for kicking his pregnant partner and threatening to, quote, hurt her so badly that she will not be able to walk again.
Just seeing the member for Kooyong, I just want to hear the question and then I'll take the point of order. It's disorderly to interrupt someone during a question, but I'm not sure what the point of order is, but I'll get the member to start his question again because I lost exactly what he said, and start the clock again.
My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Iranian national YVBM's visa was cancelled following domestic violence convictions, including for kicking his pregnant partner and threatening to, quote, hurt her so badly that she will not be able to walk again. The Albanese Labor government's watering down of the law has allowed this criminal to stay in Australia, making our country less safe. When will the Albanese Labor government apologise for this catastrophic mistake and revoke Direction 99?
Before I call the minister, I'll hear from the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. Our point of order is rule number 100D1, which says that questions must not contain statements of fact unless they are strictly necessary to make the question intelligible. The opposition all week has provided us with unnecessary details of the country of origin and the alleged crimes of hate.
Order. No, order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. The Attorney General, I don't know what is. I just want to hear the member for Kooyong, who is entitled, as every member is, to take a point of order. Same rules apply for everyone. They'll be shown with respect when they take a point of order, and I'll hear from the member for Kooyong.
The parliament does not need to hear the details of the alleged or prosecuted crimes of these individuals in posing these questions. It's unparliamentary and it's dog whistling.
I'll just hear from the Leader of the House and then I'll come back to the member for Wannon. Order.
Mr Speaker,
the member for Mitchell will cease interjecting.
Just to raise a further point of order, because it has to be raised immediately, particularly when members of the crossbench raise points of order, there is a level of aggression and shouting led by the Leader of the Opposition it's quite different to what I just got then. The level of aggro that gets applied to members of the crossbench and the level of direct anger and aggression from the Leader of the Opposition is just out of control every time there's a point of order from the crossbench. They have a right to raise these points of order without that sort of aggression.
I get the picture. Resume your seat. I'll deal with this issue and then I'll come straight to the manager or member Wannon. I want to be very clear with everyone. When someone is entitled to a point of order, whether it be the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, the Leader of the Opposition or any member of the House, they're going to be heard in silence. It's not commentary time, because that's the way question time and that's why the standing orders should operate. So moving forward, I've been pretty lenient in allowing points of order and to enable them to be heard, but the interjections, if it continues, people will not remain here for question time. So the member's raised her point of order, and I'll hear from the Manager of Opposition Business.
To the point of order, Mr Speaker, firstly, every one of these fact situations certainly can be authenticated because they are taken from decisions of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. And are they strictly necessary to make the question intelligible? Absolutely they are. In each case, we have seen appalling acts of violence, and this absolutely goes to the public policy question which needs to be determined here.
I'll deal with the point of order. Order. Members on my right. I'll deal with the point of order that was raised by the honourable member for Kooyong with respect to Standing Order 100D1. This question didn't name anyone. It had a reference in it. So it is different to the others. I appreciate the point that you're making when names are issued, but there has been a long practice in the House, whether it be owners of businesses, whether it be community representatives. It's up to the member then to make sure they are accurate and verified. So the question will stand. In this particular case, he didn't mention anyone's name. So I'll just ask the minister to answer the question, and he has the call.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for his question. The government continues to cancel visas on character grounds, as appears to have been the case here, and I continue to cancel visas from AAT set-asides where appropriate. As I outlined and the Prime Minister articulated in answer to the first question, we are issuing a new ministerial direction that is revised, and that will be focused on the question was
the minister. Order. The minister is about 15 seconds in, so it would be very difficult to take a point of order on relevance when he is talking about the decision that he was asked about. But that means once you take a point of order on relevance, it's only once under the standing order. The minister will be able to respond without interruption. Yeah. But on the point of order,
Speaker, the question said when will they revoke Ministerial Direction 99?
Resume your seat. Just remind the member for Wannon just to state the point of order, which is obviously about relevance, but just need to state that each time he takes the point of order. So, as I said, 15 seconds. I don't know if he's going to answer for the remainder, but that point of order of relevance has been taken now. So, the minister is going to be heard in silence for the remainder of the answer. The minister has the call.
Thanks, Speaker. As I was saying, this new revised direction will ensure that the two principles that have always been at the heart of visa management, protection of the community and common sense decision-making, will take place at the ART and the new ART. It will ensure that community protection outweighs other considerations, and particularly going to the case that the member referred to, we will strengthen the principles of community safety, including the impact of victims and their families, and strengthen the family violence provisions.
Give the call. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Spence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government working to support our veterans and ease cost of living pressures? What does it mean for the budget, and how is this approach different from what the government inherited?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are 6,087 veterans in the member for Spencer's community, and he does a wonderful job advocating for every single one of them. And one of the things that we are proudest of in our first three budgets, Mr Speaker, is the support that we've been able to show for Australia's veterans. Not the platitudes and placeholders that we heard from those opposite, but real dollars making a real difference. And here I want to acknowledge the efforts of the Veterans Minister, Assistant Minister Thistlethwaite, the Defence Minister and Prime Minister and Finance Minister in the other place. All of us on this side of the House respect and recognise the service and sacrifice of our men and women in uniform, and we take seriously our responsibilities to them after they leave the military. And when we came to office, there was a backlog of 42,000 claims. These weren't just abstract numbers on a spreadsheet, but they were real people with real families who have made and continue to make a real contribution to our country. Now, those opposite should be ashamed of themselves for leaving those veterans hanging for so long. We were determined to clean up the mess when we came to office, with $230 million in our first budget for staff to process the claims, and now another $477 million in this budget to fix the system as well. Order. And because of our efforts, an extra $6.5 billion will flow into the pockets of our veterans who deserve every single cent of our support, Mr Speaker. Now, the Shadow Treasurer thinks this is overspending, but we don't. Those opposite diminish the efforts of the public servants who are working around the clock to get this money to the veterans who deserve it, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Now, support for veterans is part of our efforts in the budget to help with the cost of living, and today's inflation numbers show why that's so important. As I said yesterday, the monthly inflation figures are more volatile. They don't compare the same goods and services, and that's why they bounce around. This month, petrol, private health and international travel were some of the biggest influences. Our expectations for inflation and our forecast aren't changed by today's data, Mr Speaker. Now, electricity prices were up 4.2%, but it would have been 13.9% were it not for the rebates that those opposite voted against when they voted for even higher inflation. When we came to office, inflation had a 6 in front of it, Mr Speaker, and now it has a 3 in front of it. It has moderated overall, but we need it to moderate further and faster, and that's why the budget had such a big focus on fighting inflation and easing cost of living pressures, and our support for our veterans is a really important part of those efforts.
Give a call to the honourable member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. Can the Minister for Immigration, my question is to the Minister for Immigration, can the Minister for Immigration confirm of the 153 hardened criminals that were released into the community, at least 2 of the murderers are in the community without electronic monitoring? And if we know it's at least 2, what is the number of murderers out in the community without electronic monitoring?
Order. The Minister for Home Affairs and Cybersecurity is warned. Order. Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs has the call.
Thanks very much, Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for his question. And I do say that it was the Leader of the Opposition sitting there that let someone out of immigration detention. His delegate gave that person a visa with no monitoring, no reporting obligations, and that person went on allegedly to commit a crime, and he doesn't seem interested in talking about it. Now, because he and the Shadow Minister are always playing politics. Now, this group of people are being constantly monitored. As the ABF have advised, the location of every individual is known. The decisions that are made by delegates are informed by the work of the Community Protection Board, which is comprised by a range of expert people with deep experience in these areas who consider each case on its merits as the law requires.
The Minister concluded his answer. Order. The member for Newcastle has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. And my questions to the Minister for Energy and Climate Change. How are the Albanese Labor government's plans for a future made in Australia invest in the jobs, industries and opportunities of the future in the energy sector? And what energy policies has the government ruled out and why?
The call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question. She's a passionate advocate for new energy jobs in the regions, and the member for Newcastle and her Hunter colleagues know the opportunities that this policy provides for Australia, because they are living those opportunities, Mr Speaker. They're living them. Like at the Liddell Power Station, where the Australian company SunDrive has announced their plans to open a manufacturing facility in response to our Future Made in Australia policy, which will employ more people at that site than were ever employed at the Liddell Power Station. Mr Speaker, they are the opportunities that we are seizing on the nation's behalf of the Albanese government. And last week I had the opportunity to see more of those opportunities. In Adelaide, for example, at 5B and Tindo, 2 great Australian solar companies that will be expanding and creating jobs in response to our solar sunshine policy, Mr Speaker, announced in the budget. And in Gladstone, where I could see the hydrogen opportunities. Of course, Gladstone is a green hydrogen hub under this government, as are Whyalla and Bell Bay and other sites around the country. These are the opportunities that our regions have, and we make no apologies, Mr Speaker, for concentrating on those regions going through economic change, where coal-fired power stations will close, for example. And the honourable member asked me what policies we'll reject.
Order.
Now, I've heard rumours about a policy.
The Minister will pause. The member for New England has been completely animated right throughout question time. He's been here in the parliament for almost 20 years. He's going to cease interjecting for the remainder of question time. He's now on a warning. I know he's never been thrown out of Parliament before. But order, members on my left. Order. No, it's not a competition. So the member for New England is going to remain silent for the remainder of question time. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Mr Speaker, I'm asked what policies we reject, and I have heard rumours of an alternative policy, but I'm yet to see any alternative policy. But the rumours of an alternative policy are nuclear power plants in areas where there's coal-fired power stations. Now, the Leader of the Opposition hasn't been within 100 kilometres of any coal-fired power plant since he became Leader of the Opposition, so he hasn't really been engaging in good consultation. But we saw last week a report which underlines why we reject this policy. That was the GenCost report by the CSIRO, which showed again that nuclear power plants are expensive and slow to build. And those opposite were falling over themselves to discredit the CSIRO, led by the member for New England, Mr Speaker, who explained in his normal methodical manner, calm manner, that you can't trust the CSIRO because they're Australian, Mr Speaker. Now, that got me thinking. CSIRO started GenCost in 2018 when they were in office, and they have consistently shown that nuclear is the most expensive form of energy, including while they were in office. So that got me thinking, I wonder what the member for New England thought about it when they were in government. Well, he was asked by David Spears, is nuclear under consideration? He said, it's not. It's been ruled out by reason of cost. David Spears went on and said, you're in government, you're no less than the Deputy Prime Minister, why don't you give it a push? He said, because the cost is too high, Mr Speaker. Because the cost is too high. I wonder what's changed. Mr Speaker. Sometimes, Mr Speaker, in politics you can overlearn a lesson, you can overcorrect. We were very critical of the then government for having 22 energy policies. We thought 22 was too many. But we didn't mean have zero. One is the sweet spot. Have an energy policy. If the Leader of the Opposition was any good, he could release an energy policy. He could at least be up to that.
Has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Calare.
Thank you, Speaker. To the Minister for Social Services. The Orange Seniors Village Hub provides support, education and community for many, many seniors in Orange, New South Wales. Yet funding for the Village Hub program has been cut, with no support for it in the recent budget. This has devastated our seniors. Orange City Council has confirmed that the alternative funding your department has suggested does not cover seniors and will not support the Orange Seniors Village Hub. Will you restore funding to the Orange Seniors Village Hub and support seniors in Orange and across our region?
Give the call to the Minister for Social Services.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for his question. The Albanese government is supporting older Australians and delivering cost-of-living relief to every Australian. I do recognise the important work that organisations like the Orange City Council undertake in local communities across Australia through the programs and services they deliver. The Seniors Connected program, which funded the Seniors Village Hubs, was always scheduled to cease under those opposite on the 30th of June 2024. Now, in saying that, the Albanese Labor government is looking at ways we can support Australians to stay connected to their family and friends and to confidently and safely use the internet and other digital technologies. I'm happy to continue to work with the member to ensure that we can look at other opportunities, but when it comes to this program, the program was ceasing under those opposite and the funding will finish on the 30th of June.
Give the call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for the Environment and Water. How many renewable energy projects has the Albanese Labor government signed off on? And what has been the response to these projects? And what proposals has the government rejected?
The call to the Minister for the Environment and Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Corangamite, who I know is a huge supporter of renewable energy, including great projects like the Million Household Battery in Victoria, which will be one of the largest batteries in the world, one of the largest battery projects. Of course, as a government, we are absolutely committed to net zero and to Australia doing its share to help the globe get to net zero. And that means that we've set an 82% renewable energy target. It is ambitious, but we are working day and night to get there. And that means that so far, since coming to government, we've ticked off 47 renewable energy projects. That is enough to power 3 million homes. And the good news is I've got another 136 renewable energy projects in the pipeline in front of me. What's exciting about this is we have managed to speed up the approval of onshore wind projects, for example. We're doing them 3 times faster than they were done under those opposite. And if you look at our total approvals across all types of projects, we've actually doubled on-time approvals since coming to government. And importantly, we have done it without compromising environmental standards. Now, we've approved terrific projects like the Punches Creek Solar Farm, enough to power 300,000 homes in Queensland, or the Yanco Delta Wind Farm, enough to power 700,000 homes in New South Wales. We're investing through the $22.7 billion Future Made in Australia plan, close to $9 billion for green hydrogen, close to $500 million for batteries, about $1 billion for solar panels, and very importantly, support for critical minerals, because we know that critical minerals are absolutely essential in the transition to a net zero economy. What's the difference? Those opposite had 10 years and they were told that 24 coal-fired power stations were closing, and they did nothing to actually replace that generation capacity. And now they've come up with a $387 billion nuclear fantasy. And on top of that, they're now saying that these projects shouldn't even be subject to John Howard's old environmental laws. So, if you're a nuclear project under those opposite, you get the fast track. If you're coal or gas, if you're coal or gas, you get the fast track under those opposite. If you're nuclear, you get the fast track. And if you're a renewable energy project, you're in the slow lane.
The call's now member for Wannon.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. Didn't the minister mislead the parliament when he said each of the 153 hardened criminals would be continually monitored, given that evidence in Senate estimates advises that 26 sex offenders, including child sex offenders, no longer have electronic monitoring?
Order. Members on my right will cease interjecting. Order. The member for Herbert is warned. Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs has the call.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the Shadow Minister for his question. This is a question I've answered previously, relying on the evidence given to Senate estimates that the detainees who were required to be released are being continuously monitored. But in relation to the last aspect of this question, I am deeply concerned by reports just in the Sydney Morning Herald that refer to 102 convicted sex offenders released into the community when the Leader of the Opposition was responsible, and 64 child sex offenders, not by order of a court or tribunal, released by his delegates.
Order. Members on my right, the Minister for Regional Development will cease interjecting. The member for Wannon on point of order.
Thanks, Speaker, and it's on relevance. The question was very, very direct. It said that there are, Senate estimates has shown that there are 26 child sex offenders that no longer have electronic monitoring, even though the minister said all 153 criminals would be monitored.
As the minister's concluded his answer. Okay. Order. Just remind the member for Wannon it's just about stating the point of relevance, not reading the question again. Okay, we'll move to the next question and I give the call to the member for Swan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to support value-adding resources onshore to deliver a future made in Australia? And what is standing in the way of this support?
The call to the Minister for Resources and the Minister for Northern Australia.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Swan for her excellent question. The Albanese government is absolutely determined to deliver a future made in Australia, and part of that future is the critical minerals processing industry. Make no mistake, the budget delivered by the Treasurer is the most significant budget for the future of the resources sector in this country in a generation. Traditional resources commodities like iron ore, coal and LNG are the backbone of our economy, and they will support the emerging critical minerals and rare earth element sector in the global drive to net zero. The $17 billion production tax incentive will drive critical minerals processing and value-adding in Australia. It is a serious and measured down payment on Australia, taking up our responsibility to lead on critical minerals globally. And I might say it has drawn some pretty special comments from those opposite. The Shadow Treasurer has likened the production tax incentive to giving $1 to every cafe owner for every coffee they produce. Well, I've got to say, I have a lot of respect for the baristas in this country, great small businesses, and they are vital to national productivity. But I reckon producing lithium hydroxide or vanadium pentoxide or nickel sulphate is a little bit more complex than producing a latte. And indeed, the Shadow Treasurer has missed the point entirely that a production tax incentive for processed critical minerals is a zero-risk approach for Australia. If companies don't produce a value-added product, they don't receive a tax credit. But if they do add value to products in Australia, it means that they have grown our sovereign capability, they have attracted investment, they have contributed to diversified supply chains, they have contributed to value-adding onshore, and they have grown new jobs. All this in regions and industrial centres right across the country. But what does the Coalition say to all that? Well, absolutely not. We won't have any of that. What does industry say? Well, Rob Scott from Wesfarmers Chemicals and Fertilisers has said this is smart, targeted use of the tax system to solve big problems, leverage our competitive advantage and enhance Australia's prosperity. What have other leaders said? We will support this measure. Who was that? That was Libby Medham, the leader of the WA Liberals. Another leader has said it is essential, not just for Western Australia and not just for Australia, but for the Western world to pursue production tax incentives like this. Who was that? Well, the member for Maranoa might be interested. That was Shane Love, the leader of the Nationals in Western Australia. Now, there are more than a few people opposite, members opposite, who might want to be concerned about the bubble that the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Treasurer have gone into in opposing the resources sector in this country. The member for O'Connor, the member for Durack, the member for Parkes, the member for Flynn and others all have critical minerals mines in their electorate. And they do well.
Order. Give the call to the member for Clark.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, my question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, it's almost a year since the Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs released its report on online gambling and its impacts on those experiencing gambling harm. So why hasn't the government implemented the committee's recommendations, including a gambling advertising ban? And when will the government implement the recommendations? Or are you just kicking the can down the road until after the next election?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Clark for his question and for his ongoing advocacy. He's a long-term advocate for some of the concerns that are out there in the community when it comes to gambling right across the board in all of its forms. The government has done more in our 2 years than those opposite did in their almost decade in office. This is what we have done. We've launched BetStop, the National Self-Exclusion Register. We've mandated customer pre-verification for all new online wagering accounts to prevent children from gambling and strengthen protections for Australians who have registered for BetStop. We've agreed with the states and territories for new minimum classifications for video games with gambling-like content. We've implemented new evidence-based taglines to replace the gambling responsibly taglines that were previously there that were ineffective. We've introduced nationally consistent staff training. We've required online wagering companies to send their customers monthly activity statements outlining wins and losses. We've legislated a ban on the use of credit cards for gambling. What we know, though, is that there is more to do. and the Minister for Communications and the Minister for Social Services are working diligently through all of the recommendations that were contained in the report that the late, I think all of our dear friend, I think we can say in this chamber, Peter Murphy, the report that she did. We're working through it in an orderly way. We're consulting all the appropriate groups, including gambling groups. I've met with a range of stakeholders, including people like Tim Costello and others, about these issues. We want to make sure there's a comprehensive approach to tackling gambling harm, not that you just shut down one thing in order to get something then just appear online from offshore, which is one of the concerns which are there. We want to make sure that we get it right, and that's why we're undertaking this work in the characteristically orderly, measured and considered way that this government operates.
Give the call to the member for Macarthur.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is the Albanese Labor government's $32 billion Homes for Australia plan delivering for Australians, and what could threaten further supply?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing, the Minister for Homelessness and the Minister for Small Business.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And I do want to thank the wonderful member for Macarthur. He has been a long-time supporter of making sure we get more homes on the ground. He understands that Australia doesn't have enough homes, and we haven't had enough homes for a long time. He knows how important it is that we build more homes. Indeed, we need to build more homes more quickly in more parts of the country, Mr Speaker. That's why, of course, we have our Homes for Australia plan, and it's backed with tens of billions of dollars. We've committed now $32 billion in new housing initiatives since we came to office, including more than $6 billion in our most recent budget, Mr Speaker. And there are homes already on the ground today and under construction because of the decisions we have taken as a government. In places like Western Sydney, where the Prime Minister and the Treasurer and I were last week, where we were hearing about the progress and seeing the progress of more than 400 new homes in Westmead, new affordable rental homes, Mr Speaker, for key workers. And in Ulverston, in my home state of Tasmania, where I saw 400 new homes, 48 new homes, almost at completion, about to get people into them. These are real homes on the ground, Mr Speaker, that I saw just in the last week. And I met with people like Glenda, Glenda in Riverwood in New South Wales, like Nana Pam and Kevin and Leanne in Latrobe in their new homes, where they spoke to me about how important it is for them to have a safe, secure and affordable roof over their head, Mr Speaker. That's why we're delivering our $32 billion Homes for Australia plan. It's why we're working with the housing sector, with the construction sector and, importantly, with the other tiers of government, particularly the states and territories, because we need to get more homes on the ground more quickly. But it will take everybody with their shoulder to the wheel to meet our nation's ambitious housing target of 1.2 million homes from 1 July to the end of the decade, Mr Speaker. It is ambitious because it needs to be. We need to add to supply because supply is the answer to our housing challenges. We know that, the experts know that. But apparently those opposite don't seem to know it, Mr Speaker. They voted against more homes when they voted against our Housing Australia Future Fund. They're voting against getting more people into home ownership with our Help to Buy shared equity scheme. We hear they're not going to have a target. They didn't offer in their budget reply $1 new for one new home, Mr Speaker. They have very little to offer except negativity. They've of course rehashed their Super for Housing policy. It doesn't build one new home. All it does is push up prices and it wrecks people's retirement, Mr Speaker. Those opposite should be getting on board with our Homes for Australia plan. They should be supporting it because it will provide more help for home buyers, more help for renters and more homes for Australians that need it most.
The call to the honourable member for Cook.
Riley. My question is to the Minister for Immigration. New Zealand citizen Dawson Wariri's visa was cancelled following serious domestic violence convictions, including for punching his wife so hard he split her eyelid, physically assaulting his 15-year-old son. The Albanese Labor government's watering down of the law has allowed this criminal to stay in the country, making Australia less safe. When will the Albanese Labor government apologise for this catastrophic mistake and revoke Direction 99?
Call to the Minister for Immigration, Multicultural and Citizenship.
Thanks, Speaker, and I thank the member for Cook for his question. As I've previously said in question time today, I will be issuing a new revised ministerial direction, and part of that is to ensure that visa decisions are guided by those two principles: protection of the community and common sense. And as I said in an answer to an earlier question, there will be a higher focus on these than has been the case in the past. And I'm sure the Leader of the Opposition, when he was listening to the examples that the Prime Minister put to him, was reflecting on how previous ministerial directions under him might have been improved too. These are changes that will improve decision-making. Now, on the specific question, I can say that I have already briefed senior officials of my department so that these changes can progress expeditiously.
The Minister had just said on the specifics of the question and listening carefully, so it's going to be a long bow to say that it was on relevance when he was giving the exact answer. Now, smart move. Order. The Minister will continue to be relevant to the answer.
So I have
to the
briefed
question.
senior officials of the department so that the principles of the new revised direction can come into place properly without any unintended consequences like those the former Minister for Home Affairs, the Leader of the Opposition, was not conscious of when he was responsible for this. And I note again a report in today's Sydney Morning Herald which begins, 2 men convicted of accessory to murder were released from federal detention when Opposition Leader Peter Dutton was the Minister in charge of Immigration and Home Affairs. Released by him, not by the AAT, by his delegate when he was responsible. When is he going to get up?
Has the Minister concluded his answer? Has the Minister concluded his answer? On a point of order, subsequent to the question.
Mr. Speaker, a point of order, and it goes to the order of the House. You have warned the Minister for Home Affairs. She has repeatedly interjected since being warned. The standing orders should apply equally to both sides of the House. And with respect, opposition members have been ejected. I ask that you similarly treat the Minister for Home Affairs.
Order. Well, if that was the case, every time I warned someone if they interjected, we wouldn't virtually have anyone here, including the member for New England, who I was specific about. You're not in trouble. You're fine. And I didn't hear, because there was too much noise of interjection, but just if people are on warnings, trust me, if I hear you and interject, you won't be here, no matter which side of the chamber or wherever you're sitting in the chamber. I'm very lenient when it comes to people getting to warnings, but once you're on a warning, I thank the Deputy Leader for reminding the House and assisting my job to remind people that if you're on a warning, don't interject. Give the call to the honourable member for Cunningham.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How will the Albanese Labor government's Future Made in Australia deliver new jobs to regional Australia? And what approaches has the government rejected?
The Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government has the call.
Can I thank the member for Cunningham for the question and her strong representation of the people of beautiful Wollongong and her advocacy for projects like the Mount Ousley interchange, which she's been a champion of. People in Wollongong and all of our regions know that our Future Made in Australia policy will be a boon for the regions. Under our Future Made in Australia policy, one of the priority initiatives outlined in the budget was the development of an Australian low-carbon liquid fuel industry. This will help hard-to-abate transport sectors like aviation and heavy haulage to reduce their emissions while creating new jobs and opportunities in the country. There is money for innovation, certification and shortly we'll be consulting on options to introduce a production incentive to kick-start local manufacturing of fuel, including the supply of Australian feedstock like canola and sugarcane waste. Currently, over 60% of canola exported to Europe is used to produce biofuels, and 400 kilotonnes of tallow exported to Europe, the same that we then import back in at some cost for these industries. We can do this here, and our industry agrees. Bioenergy Australia says our policies will create jobs in regional Australia, boost economic growth, bolster energy security and future-proof our tourism and transport sectors. GrainCorp said federal budget funding for low-carbon fuel initiatives is playing into its strategy to become a major player in the renewable fuels supply chain. Now, I'm asked about what approaches have we rejected. Well, we've rejected what those opposite think of regional industries and support for manufacturing in our regional industries that saw our car industry leave our shores, and we're rejecting calls to ditch local production, to support local incentives for production and to destroy our aluminium industry. Now, back in 2012, during a presentation to the Mineral Councils of Australia, the now Shadow Treasurer, a great champion for manufacturing in our regions apparently, advocated the scrapping of all local content policies and the closure of aluminium refining in Australia. That's what the Shadow Treasurer said. This is an industry that employs 3,500 Australians and in 2023 exported 1.5 million tonnes of aluminium worth $5.2 billion to our economy. Now, the Shadow Treasurer apparently recalled our local industry uncompetitive and similarly weak. Where the Albanese government is working to deliver a future made in Australia, the coalition wants a future made overseas. They want to close down our industries. We want a future made in Australia, including in our regions.
Prime Minister. Prime Minister has the call.
I ask the further questions be placed on the notice paper.